that history was rewritten by Yigal Amir and things would have been different. What it always reminds me of is what we grew up learning about is that one person can really change history. And I think in this case, that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the what if, history is full of what ifs, right? We can never know. We were talking about what if Morgenthau convinced Roosevelt to bomb the tracks to Auschwitz in 1942? What if JFK hadn't been assassinated? What if? Fact of the matter is that Rabin's coalition was made up of 62 out of 120 PESI members. 3 of those members were from a very small factional party that came out of Rafi Eitan's party called Ye'ud. Would the coalition have lasted had Rabin been, who knows, probably not. Elections were scheduled for a year and a half later anyway. I mean, there's so many what ifs. But like you said, I mean, history, World War I was started by the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. I mean, history's changed for good or for bad by individuals. And so the what if question is really, it may be an interesting cerebral exercise, but I would not let any form of hubris make an absolute formulation as to what would happen had Rabin survived.
Okay. All right, I think we've started the conversation. Now I want to continue the conversation and invite all of you to join us more directly. So I think we have several ushers who are roaming and they have microphones, and so I will invite first, Janice, would you start us off with our first question from the audience?
Yes, of each of those. And secondly, I think it's very clear that this particular act was perpetrated by a very right-wing religious activist. My question to you is, do you think Bibi was I don't want to say in cahoots, but fanned the flames, so to speak, of the feeling that was going around, perhaps for his own party's benefit?
So I'll answer the second question first. I came into the election in 1996, so it was after the assassination of Rabin. It was the election Bibi versus Perez. In elections everywhere, there is a fine line between rhetoric and going too far. I know Bibi had no way of assuming that this would lead to a political assassination. Was the rhetoric a political means to an ends of hopefully a large vote? Probably. In terms of the first question, for instance, there's a scene where you have this Professor Netta who's calling Rabin a schizoid, and they're in this council meeting. Did that happen? Did it not happen? Who knows? There's no way of knowing if it happened. The piece about the pulsa donura. So, in the movie, it's made to look like this pulsa donura is something that happens once in a century. And there's a saying in Israeli politics: you haven't made it high enough unless there's a pulsa donura against you. It was done against Sharon when he left Gaza. It was done against Bibi when he announced that his support for a two-state solution. It was even announced 2 years ago against Naftali Bennett, who was the head of the Settler Council. So, so again, the liberties the director took of mixing in fiction with documentary footage. Certainly, all the testimonies that were transcription testimonies that the council took during the investigation, that's fact. I mean, that's a transcript of testimony. Beyond that, even the splicing of the documentary footage is a little questionable. But it's important for all of you, to understand what the film is. It's a docudrama. It's not a documentary. There are a lot of liberties taken with it, and you have to really pull out the truth and make a decision for yourself if what was perceived to be fiction actually happened or not.
2 questions. One for Jan. Don't you think it's a false equivalence to say the right-wing extremists and left-wing extremists are the same? Isn't it worse among the right? And there's hardly any extremism among the left, the Jewish left. That's a ridiculous comment, don't you think? And hey, George, what presidential candidate do you work for?
Dr. Ben Carson.
Wow. Well, that's really, talk about a docudrama.
The man separated conjoined twins in women's wombs. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but he's not a president.
Okay, let's focus on the film and let's leave presidential political debate in the United States
There's
for
no
the parking
political
lot.
extremism on the Jewish left. I got you.
Well, I'm not
This
sure.
is the parking lot conversation. Let's come back to the film, Jan.
I mean, in answer to your question, I am not aware of any violence on the left extreme.
Right. There isn't any.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Do we? Yep.
My question was about the demographics of the voters in Israel. I don't know for sure. Are only Jewish people allowed to vote in Israel, or do Arabs also get to vote?
No, every Israeli Arab citizen has the right to vote.
And,
That's why there are 12 Knesset members who are Israeli Arabs.
okay.
Their largest party.
13, excuse me.
Their largest party.
And among the people who vote, how many consider themselves secular Jews versus very religious Jews, and would put a Torah type of justice above anything that the legal system would come up with?
You're asking what percentage of the voters are religious versus secular? Or members of the Knesset?
Are so religious that they would hold a Torah justice above whatever
Who knows?
a court would come up
I
with?
don't think there's any way to document
They haven't
that.
polled this.
Yeah, there's no way to document who would put Torah, as you call it, Torah justice over political justice. There's a very interesting dividing line in Israel. When you ask people in Israeli society, do you consider yourself a Jew first or an Israeli first? It's a very telling question. And it really is kind of a left-right dividing line. I mean, the right is made up of traditional Jews, secular Jews. It's made up of what they call modern Orthodox Jews, Haredi Jews. I mean, so the spectrum of religiosity is quite wide. And so to nail it down to one particular group, you know, if you were to take out the Israeli Arabs out of the equation, look at just the Jewish population in Israel. It's about a 60-40 number between those who vote right of center versus left of center. How that breaks down in elections is always different because of the way, you know, parties, you know, the number of parties that run and everything else. You know, I will say, you know, there is a problem, and the problem is, and we talked about this on the phone briefly. You know, there's this now call from the left that it's abhorrent to pass laws in Israel for asking for oaths of allegiance or acts of loyalty to the country. You know, I'll remind everyone in this room, any elected official takes an oath saying, "I'll do solemnly swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States." And in fact, naturalized citizens have to go beyond that and say that I entirely and absolutely denounce and abjure loyalty and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. So it's really, you know, it's kind of the ultimate hypocrisy for Americans to say to Israelis, "How dare you want to pass an oath of an allegiance?" By the way, most of us probably stood in class every morning in elementary and high school and said we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. So why that is so unnecessary in Israel, I don't understand.
Just
Yeah,
one
I
last-
want to just invite Jan and George to just offer some brief final thoughts and observations.
Okay, mine is very brief. If you want to learn more about the Rabin assassination, I highly recommend a book that just came out last year, Dan Efron's book, Killing of a King. He was here for part of the book festival or something, but it's a really good read, and it's a good book. I recommend it.
Yeah, actually, it is. I mean, I haven't read the book completely, but in terms of you know, journalism and truth, it certainly goes much deeper than the film does. So yeah, listen, I'll finish by saying what I saw. I mean, extremism of any sort is unacceptable. And what the film ended with, the idea that you know, we resorted to political murder, assassination, to try and get to an ends of political ends is absolutely unacceptable. And it really was, the Rabin assassination, I think, was the turning point in Israeli society. I mean, Israel lost its innocence as a nation when Rabin was assassinated, and did lose some of that moral high ground that it did have. I think it's gone to enormous extents to try and mitigate that from ever happening again. But as we said, God forbid, there's always a possibility, and politicians on the right and the left have an obligation to point it out and stop it whenever it raises its head.
So I think in some ways we have some sense of identification and empathy with Israelis and the reactions over the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. I want to thank Jan Jaben-Eilon and George Birnbaum.